Namaste viewers, welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA. Today we are going to talk about Ilhan Omar and her obsession with things Hindus. Those of you who do not know Ilhan Omar, she is a remarkable Congress lady in the US Congress, very vocal, very determined, very focused, and you got to applaud her for her determination and doggedness in trying to do what she wants to do. So to discuss the new latest resolution that she has put in the US Congress, it is Resolution 1196. I would urge all of you to read it up. Don't trust my word, but read it up, because getting one of the best ways to get engaged with something is to read and know about it. Let it not be a hearsay. Talk about Ilhan Omar and this particular resolution. I have greatest of pleasures in welcoming two gentlemen who are remarkably active in the Hindu community. They are determined, focused, and are willing to take the battle on. Nikunj Trivedi, the young man who is the founder and chairman of Coalition of Hindus of North America, and Mr. Utsav Chakrabarti, who is executive director of HinduPACT. And if I'm not wrong, and if I'm allowed to say, as a full disclosure, I'm also on the advisory of HinduPACT. So having said that, I want to, talk about this resolution because it comes right on the heels of another resolution which Ilhan Omar set up with reference to Islamophobia. That also is highly targeted towards India. So that's what I'm saying. What do you think? What's going on? And this resolution, if I may read it for the purpose of the benefit of listeners, it is condemning human rights violations and violations of international religious freedom in India, including those targeting Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, Adivasis, and other religious and cultural minorities. This is an attack on Hindus. It is an attack on India of an unmitigated kind that if we do not address it, we will rue it for the rest of our lives. Nikunj, your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right. Essentially, look, this is a pattern. If you go back several years, I mean, if you look at Ilhan Omar's political career in general, right, one of the big targets that she has always been Hindus in India, and resolutions after resolutions, and also comments after comments that she has introduced has always been targeting one country, that is India. And unfortunately, she doesn't understand the nuances and the politics that go on in this subcontinent. And she has, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a little bit later. She has a lot of support from sort of this Islamist lobby and some of those agents that actually work very sort of over time to destabilize India and destabilize sort of the Hindu narrative in the U.S. It's when a U.S. Public official, doesn't matter what their politics are, but when they start to visit a area that is, that is at the crosshairs of the subcontinent politics, they really create a problem. And when she decided to visit Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, she definitely raised eyebrows, and India slammed her for that, which we have seen in the news. What's really peculiar about that also is that she completely ignores all the things that have happened, the 70 years of issues, human rights violations against Kashmiri Hindus, against other minorities within that region. And she completely focuses on how the quote-unquote atrocities of the Indian government, the quote-unquote human rights violations by the Indian government, things like that. So you see this pattern of Hindu-phobic narrative that comes out of her mouth and her office and her supporters, essentially. And she works with, certain types of other congressional members. Now, why is this important? Because she sits on the House Foreign Relations Committee, right? It's a powerful committee that decides and talks, looks at policies that impact various types of relations with countries. And a country that is very friendly to the United States, i.e. India, and being the largest democracy and the oldest democracy together, these types of things really create a negative image or perpetuate a negative image about a friendly country within the United States. And that she has been working overtime on that. We saw that a few years ago during the CAA and the 370 Article 370 abrogation times that she, along with a few others, the Quad, for example, that she works in, were working overtime to showcase this sort of Hindu-phobic narrative, one-sided, very, very biased narrative about Hindus and India. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Thank you. Thank you. Utsavji, your HinduPACT yesterday issued a press release, and I read the press release. Thank you for sharing with me. And, the point which is very important about Ilhan Omar is that she is very determined. And determined in the sense that, remember, she talked about openly in the American society that 9/11 was done by some people. So her support for her own belief and her own faith is absolutely, you got to grudgingly applaud that. Why is it that we Hindus do not have any determined focus, though we have four congressmen in the House, but I have not seen anyone come against or even comment on this? Is it fear? Or is it too much of, soft peddling? Or is it just towing the party line? Where do we go from here?
So one thing we have to understand when we look at Ilhan Omar's activism in the House, as well as in the society at large, Ilhan Omar is the poster girl of Jamaat-e-Islami and Muslim Brotherhood. She has been very open about it. She has been very clearly supportive of their agenda. And she has been very attached, openly actually, to those institutions and countries that use both Muslim Brotherhood and Jamaat-e-Islami, both very powerful pan-Islamist groups, as tools for outreach, advocacy, and lobby in Washington, D.C. So she has been very clear from the beginning itself about where she stands and who she stands with. That is the reason that Nikunj was very, very clear about how Ilhan keeps hating Hindus and keeps bringing resolutions targeting India and Hindus because it affects Hindu Americans as well. She has also been doing the same thing with Israel. So if you noticed, last year she had done the exact same thing with this. She went on and said that Israel and America are not very different from Hamas and Hezbollah. So she compared her own country, as well as America as one of the biggest allies in the Middle East, Israel, to terrorist organizations. So she has been very brazen, and I have to say totally wrong about some of these things. But she goes on and does this for shock value and to pacify the constituents she represents in pan-Islamist groups. Compare that to what the four mentioned American Hindu lawmakers you mentioned. Most of them do not even feel very comfortable identifying and presenting themselves as Hindus. Most of them, tacitly supported by our own community and their support base, identify as Indian Americans, and they represent and push forward ideas through those lenses. For example, all these four try to call themselves as part of a caucus called the Samosa Caucus, a very culturally flimsy, almost it's a funny name. It is funny actually, but it shows the lack of gravity in their own self-identity, and that is not just because of they want to be that way. It is also because how we as Indian American or Hindu Americans have been presenting ourselves and our causes to them. So that is very important for us to understand that it goes both ways. It's a top-down and bottom-up approach. And part of the reason why the four Hindu American lawmakers have not been able to represent the set of ideas and constituents that Ilhan Omar has brazenly and often wrongly represented is because our constituents do not present those thoughts, do not present those ideas. And that's the outcome of the four lawmakers you get, which is basically Samosa Caucus. So that's the difference, I think, primarily that lies between these two poles that you just presented. Another thing we have to understand, Ilhan Omar's supporters are openly connected to Pakistani intelligence. In fact, I will go further on during this conversation and explain some of the things she has done in the recent past, including the visit to Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir that Nikunj mentioned. These things need to be investigated, and I'll go further during the conversation and explain some of those things.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for referring to these matters. Let's go right in and dive in without waiting for further opportunity. I would put it this way, that when the iron is hot, strike. So, like Utsavji said, Nikunj, I call you Nikunj. I don't call you Nikunj Ji,
That's
but you're
great.
too
Please
young.
don't.
We have a massive, beautiful
Call me
generation
Utsav
gap,
too, please.
and we bridge the gap very well. So, Nikunj, I would say, invite you to comment upon. One of the things that happens is that these four gentlemen who are four, congressmen who are there, as Utsavji very correctly mentioned, that they have fudged their own identity. The one important part is they love the Indian money contributions that go to their campaign, but they know they don't win because of Indian votes. So we get taken for granted. We get taken for granted. They pay only lip service to our needs. And we eulogize them, as is our pattern, as the cultural pattern of Hindus is that we eulogize people who are in the position of power. Now, the question is, how do we address that, vis-a-vis a person like Ilhan Omar? Let's put it this way, that while she is the symbol, like Utsavji said, the poster girl for people of this entire thing, but she does it brazenly. There is no repercussion. There is no discipline from party. On the contrary, she uses the tools very smartly. Think about it. A girl, an immigrant from Somalia, is taking on the two largest and the strongest democracies in the world to shake them up, right? Should this not be a lesson to us knowledgeable, wise guys as to what to do next?
Yeah, and let me kind of step back for a second. I want to talk about the Samosa caucus for a
Yeah.
second. You know, people, they identify themselves as Indian American, but let me tell you something. At least two of them have been very anti-India.
Yes.
Okay, so we cannot call themselves Indian Americans if you're, I mean, you could be Indian American as an identity, but then you continue to sponsor resolutions, you continue to support anti-India and, frankly speaking, anti-Hindu activities. For example, Pramila Jayapal had actually sponsored Equality Labs for their caste survey in the, as a hearing, and that was the launch in about 2016 or 2017. I forgot the exact date. It was the launch of a major campaign against the Hindus in America, and we are seeing those fruits today in all these caste resolutions, conversations around caste. And she was the main person who gave the boost to this thing, right? To make it legitimate. Because before that, a lot of people were just not, they were just like slamming it. It was inaccurate. But when a congressional member decides to hold a briefing on this and invite that type of anti-Hindu group in, you have this issue. Same thing happened during the CAA. You started to see that anti-India and anti-Hindu narrative play out, and she and a couple others were really behind that. Then finally, someone like Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna sits on the Pakistani caucus, right? Was sitting on the Pakistani caucus, slamming India, and he was openly critical about all these things, right? So we can't call them Indian Americans per se if they're going to be working against our community. As it is in America, the idea of the understanding about Hindus and about India is very, very biased, right? And then you have your own brown people standing in front of them like sepoys and basically slamming our own community again and again without providing a more balanced view. I'm not asking them to become pro-Hindu and this and that. They need to be balanced, so they don't show the other side of things. So I just wanted to kind of talk about the Samosa caucus. Now let's talk about this particular situation here that we were earlier referring to. Look at the resolutions language. You read the resolutions language, the text of it, right? The first text, it does not include Hindus. Okay, so there's this, now there's a binary. Okay, Hindus are oppressing everybody else. And this line that you see here is very consistent. Okay, it's been consistent for at least 4 to 5 years that I have seen this line of Muslims, Dalits, Sikhs, Adivasis, Christians, blah blah blah. Say every single one. And by the way, they also make Dalits look like non-Hindus.
That's right.
Okay, and which is not true at all, because you have a large Dalit population that is also very strongly Hindu. But here you want to make an appearance that Hindus are only upper caste and they are this sort of supremacist, and then equating them to the white supremacists in America, right? That's the idea that is being peddled here by Ilhan Omar, by the Quad, and many other people who are aligned in this nexus. And as Utsav mentioned, there's a lot of Islamist support. Some of the organizations, which I'm sure he'll talk about, have openly condemned Hinduism. openly condemned Hindus, and they were behind some of the very strong anti-Hindu, like this dismantling global Hindutva conference that happened last year in September of 2021. They were behind some of these things. So I'll stop here and hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Utsavji, this is the point which comes back again, dismantling Hindutva thing conference that happened, which in a way got dismantled by us, our efforts. What are the odds of that happening again? Because our enemy will keep coming back on these matters. Are we ready for that?
Correct. And I believe we are. I would say that the Dismantle Hindutva Conference, second version of it or iteration of it was attempted when the Russian-Ukrainian conflict just started. I think they planned it at the perfectly wrong time, and nobody paid attention to it. It fell apart on its own. I think they're going to do it again this year at the same time when last year's Dismantle Hindutva Conference happened. I think the biggest weakness that many of these groups have is that they are so doggedly determined to continuously perpetuate a hate agenda that every time they do it, there is some Hindu response. And I have to say that even though Hindus are not that well organized or well funded to really deal with the scale of the problem, but the truth is on our side, and therefore even a slightly diminished response over a period of time adds up in countering these people. But the biggest challenge here is that we have to continuously work, and people like Nikunj, people like myself have to continuously work to look forward towards these and preempt these, and then unite the community and prepare a response and continuously go forward and educate the rest of the world about who Hindus in America really are and who Hindus and Indians really are. So that's a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year work. And I think that is where the challenge lies.
And you have definitely stated the challenge very correctly, because majority of us are hardworking people. We don't get involved in the local politics. We don't get engaged with the life around us, as a result of which one fine day we wake up. We need to be awakened, even if we're not woke. That the point which I'm trying to make here is that, 3 years ago, those of you know me know this, I had done a show with a real concern that are Hindus facing an existential threat? Are we in denial? And I'm glad that in the last 3 years, there has been significant action happening. So the kudos to both of you and all of us who are in it to make sure that we are participating in it. What is the next step to do? You talked about money, organization. Are we Hindus in denial, apathetic? Whatever happens, everything will be all right.
We are.
We are very emotional people. We react most of the time. Whereas we understand intellectually, proactive step is always the best step, but we always end up reacting to something, as a result of which we are always defensive. And those of you who have played soccer or any sports, it's very difficult to chase the ball all the time. The guy who keeps the ball controls the game. And that's what is important to bring the sports analogy. When are we going to get possession of the ball? And if you've seen football, the team that is denied possession, when he gets it, they go berserk and lose possession immediately. So the narrative is set by them, and they also put the counter narrative, and we have none of our own. Nikunj.
No, absolutely. I mean, you and I have had several conversations, and, Utsav and I go back 20 plus years, in terms of activism. So we have had this conversation multiple times. The problem is we're always reacting. You're right. And first, of course, reaction is important, right? The first thing is important to react, because if you're just sleeping and you're not even reacting, then that's a problem in general. So the first thing is reaction, and now then there should be action. So I think that we are beyond a stage of reaction now. I think that there is enough reaction. Because of social media and platforms like yourselves, there's enough information now available. But I think institutions need to focus on proactive policy. And that means, for example, this particular resolution, to give you an example, can be a good opportunity to engage with a lot of lawmakers around the entire country. And everybody needs to do that. It doesn't matter if you identify yourself Indian American only or a Hindu American only. It doesn't matter. It impacts you regardless. Because if you look at that, the resolution, what is one word that comes out of that? Hindu, Hindu, Hindu. Okay, but Hindu is not used in a positive connotation. There is no other country today that is being accused of quote unquote a religion nationalism than India in a large scale, right? So when it comes to this conversation, there's always, if you call yourself Hindu, you become a Hindu nationalist or a Hindu supremacist. These words continue to be used again and again and again, and deliberately. With India and even BJP is not a Hindu party. There are a lot of minorities within the BJP, right? So India is not a Hindu country per se because that's what they want to showcase, unfortunately, right? So what ends up happening is we need to understand this. We need to be proactive and go and engage with your local lawmakers because congressional members need to hear from our community. I'll tell you two things. In the recent campaign around swastika that we have been doing in California, a lot of these lawmakers have never heard from our community. They just don't even know where we exist. They just think, oh, Hindu is very nice, samosa, chai, and India and Holi and Diwali. That's all they know, but they don't know the concerns that we have. Similarly, in this particular situation, all we have to do is go to congressional members and senators in our own constituency and show them that, hey, this is a very Hindu-phobic and anti-India resolution that would damage the relations between the countries and damage the relations between our community and the rest of the mainstream. That needs to happen. That's number one. The final point is we need to make sure institutions, you call yourself Indian American, don't just focus on Diwali, Holi, Garba, and these sort of secular / social celebrations. Go and have a conversation about what it means to be Indian American with a lawmaker. Don't just invite them for like a photo op. Sit down with them and have a conversation. And I think institutions need to play a role in making sure that we can advocate for our community. Both COHNA and HinduPACT are doing that, but we need a lot more on the ground to do this more and more and more. For example, where you are, right? There's a great opportunity.
Thank you. Utsavji, Nikunj brought out some very important points, and the fact that both of you have been active for the last 20 years or plus or minus. It is important for us to bear in mind that institutional thing which Nikunj was talking about. Look at the outcry Satya Nadella had to go through when he refused to entertain equality labs. Satya Nadella is Google, right?
Sundar Pichai.
Sundar Pichai, sorry. Yeah. So Sundar Pichai was attacked as a Brahmin thing. Nobody knows, nor do we clarify to the American corporate and the American world that we are who we are and where we are because of our merit and performance. Caste had nothing to do with it, nor did any swastika had to do anything. And you brought the swastika issue, which is a very big matter. It cannot be taken lightly, and I hope sometime Government of India gets involved in it. It is important for them to also set right the picture, because the German Haken Kreuze, Hitler Haken Kreuze, was never called swastika. Somebody inserted that. Today we see in Australia, in California, they are talking about bad swastika, good swastika. There is nothing like a good swastika. It's Haken Kreuze. I tweeted when Victoria in Australia declared Haken Kreuze Nazi swastika as illegal and whatever. I said, call it Haken Kreuze. It's not swastika. That's the important point that we have to drive. And you are right, Nikunj. Even in New York, when it was going to be declared as a hate symbol, on the Zoom call that we had with assemblymen and senators, they all confessed we had no idea what it meant so much for you guys. So it is very important, and I have been a champion of this conversation, that forget about presidential election. Get involved in your PTA, education board, your entire local community, the councilmen and councilwomen. Educate them, because that's where your vote counts. Utsavji, as HinduPACT, going forward, what are the things that we ought to work on? The time for pontification is over. We know enough. We know who. We know what. Where do we go from here?
So I will outline three important things that are the immediate need of the hour, because there is going to be long-term strategy, there is going to be long-term efforts, but there are three things that have to be addressed immediately. Number one, the community leaders that we have who talk to lawmakers, who are part of PACs, who are donors, they need to work with us. One of the biggest mistakes I have seen happening within the community, and I saw that during the 2020 cycle, because I did interact with a lot of political action committees that American Hindus have already, and they do donate to many important people, lawmakers. They are photo of people. Many of these people actually give so much money, but they do not ask for anything concrete or anything that has been thought through. You know, to just go and say that do something good for India is the vaguest way you can dismiss and throw your money away. What do you mean by do something good for India? I saw that happening again and again and again in 2020 cycle. So my biggest goal during this cycle is to actually urge the community leaders who do donate, who are part of PACs, to come to us, because we are working very hard as HinduPACT, as COHNA, as many other organizations, to create the thought leadership, to create and provide the research that they need. And we are here for you to provide that. That is the number one most important thing. Please avail us during the 2022 cycle. Uh, the next step going forward, we have to start talking about who we are and what our history has been. I'll give you a quick example. My family is a mixed family. My wife is not of Indian origin. She's of Cuban and Colombian origin, who was born in New Jersey. So when all these events happen, especially the caste targeted events, she asks me questions and asks me to explain things. And I try my best to explain. And one of the things I understood while I was explaining is that we do a very poor job as a community to talk about our victimhood. We have been enslaved. We have been colonized for the last 800 years, plus minus a couple of hundred years, depending on which part of the Indian subcontinent you are from. So Sundar Pichai, if you look at the privilege that Sundar Pichai comes from, look back the last 800 years of his family. He is one of the most underprivileged people in this country, and look where he has reached. So talking of privilege, people target Sundar Pichai as a upper caste Hindu privilege, whatever they want to call it. Let's discuss where he comes from. Let's see where he went to school. Let's see how many dollars his father made per day, and then compare it with the Americans who claim to be underprivileged. I did that. And I realized that we can do a really good job if we are just honest and talk about our past. So I think that's the next thing I would like everybody to do. Young American Hindus need to know that just because their father has a house which has 6 bedrooms in it and has 2 Mercedes cars doesn't mean that they came with that wealth. It took hundreds of years of effort, education, and sincere hard work to get there. And that has to be talked about. So that's the second most important thing I would present. And the third most important thing is that as a community, we need to do more outreach amongst ourselves and to the outside world. As Nikunj rightly pointed out, go and talk to your local lawmaker, go and talk to other people out there. We in HinduPACT, our community never talked about the 1971 genocide. That happened just 50 years ago. 3 million Hindus. One of the largest deaths, events of deaths in the last 50, 60 years. Completely unrecognized, not just outside, but within our community. So we made an effort. We are making an effort. Go to a city council, talk about it. Just let people know. And in that process, we are realizing our own people don't know it. So these are the 3 immediate steps that I would say we need to do. And we need to do it very fast and in a very organized way without getting irrational or emotional, because truth is on our side. You just have to present the truth and do it in a systematic way. That, I think, Vibhuti Ji, is our case forward.
Thank you very much. You put it very well. And I put the sports analogy, cricket analogy, since Indians understand cricket well. You got to know whether you are playing T20 or a 50-over match or a 5-day test match. You need to play the game accordingly. And what I find, Nikunj, you have set up COHNA, and it's a brilliant organization. I hope you have succeeded, and in your organizational efforts, you are doing a wonderful job. And I wanted to ask you, narrative building. Narrative building is key. Behind everything else is narrative building. I recall several years ago when a senator told me, and Utsav will appreciate when I end that particular thing. He said, "We love you Indians as immigrants to the country. You are professionals, you are hardworking, you have family values, you take care of your children. You are not a law and order problem. You are not criminals, and you ask for nothing." Is it time that we have to learn to ask, because sometimes we are seekers, we are always seeking. but we never learned how to ask. But then, how does the narrative building happen? Knowing full well, I don't want to wean away from Ilhan's obsession with Hindus. She is obsessed. Whether she's paid to be obsessed, whether she's part of Soros' campaign of a publicly declared $1 billion fund for dismantling Hindus and dismantling Narendra Modi, we know that. It's public knowledge. How come nobody has sued him? I mean, because I know this for sure. If Ambani or Adani were to set up $1 billion fund to dismantle something, it will be a global uproar. And that narrative building is key. Both of you have that big, big responsibility, along with Hindu American Foundation, of narrative building. And I'll give you an example so that I want your comment. When Prime Minister Trudeau, in this part of the world, imposed emergency to crush the truckers' strike, it was hailed. Terry Milewski, who is a Canadian journalist and a very respectable guy who done an enormous work on Khalistan, exposing Khalistani, and he faces a life threat. He came on this show with Dr. Praveen Sinha, and he said he did. I said, what do you think about that? He said he did whatever the Constitution allowed him to do to protect the Canadian property and Canadian people. I said, what would you have said, Terry, if Modi had done the similar declaration of emergency to save people's lives and property and economy in India? That's the important part. How do we crush, manage, and tell the truth in the manner like Utsavji said, truth is on our side, Satyamev Jayate, we gave the world the slogan. How do we address that issue, Nikunj?
So it's there's a lot it's a lot to unpack what you just said. So it'll be another
dialogue and an outswinger all at the same time. Go ahead.
So see, narrative building is critical. there are as there's reaction and action, right? So immediately you need to do certain things. When a resolution is passed, you need to do some counters. But in the long run, so I'll give you an example. When we are in libraries, when we are in schools, when we are in local politics, we don't talk about what it means to be a Hindu. Number one, we don't even go and give a presentation. So I'll give you an example. The Sikh Coalition, has a great presentation about Sikhism on their website. And they actually train you. You can take that, you can go and give it in your local school district. So many parents do that. You can also identify Sikhs by the way, their identity itself, whether it's the turban or the style of talking, etc. Now, we don't assert ourselves, right? That's the number one thing. So education is really critical at the grassroots level, and that's what we are trying to do. Second thing is setting up institutions that actually bring out data to lawmakers. Because see, lawmakers, how do they make policies? They rely on data, they rely on narrative, they rely on their staffers to understand what's going on. So like last year when we had the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, the first time we had a congressional briefing about biases against Hindu Americans. I mean, I was surprised that we have never done such a thing as a community, right? Just doing these briefings provide an opportunity for the lawmakers to understand what the Hindu community really wants and what is it all about. That's how you build narrative. And then you have to have a lot of financial resources dedicated to this. I'm not gonna mince words here. We need to have money. Other organizations and other communities pour millions of dollars to support political leaders, but also to build this narrative, right? Just one simple thing I'll tell you. I was in my own local library during Eid. There was a beautiful setup of what Eid means, what the contributions of Muslims were. And one of the things that really attracted me was this idea of Muslim mathematics. Now, remember that where did the Arabs learn the mathematics from? Right? It came from India. But I have never seen something like this in Diwali or any other Hindu ceremonies or festivals where, in the library, you have a beautiful setup about Diwali, you're handing out diyas, doing something, etc. How much does it take? How much money does it take? And how much effort does it take? Very little. But I wanted to give that example because that is called narrative building, right? The soft power, the soft narrative building. And one of the things that I've really liked right now is the HSS, Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, has done this Darshana exhibition across the US. And it was really well. I have attended a bunch of them. They've done a great job attracting lawmakers. So that's the type of narrative building that needs to happen. And then final point, academically, we need to create more academic firepower, because at the end of the day, if you look at a lot of the academics, right, they're quite anti-Hindu. And I have a long list of thousands of them that are very, very anti-Hindu. They don't necessarily sit in the religion department. They sit all over. So we need to build our own academic firepower to challenge those people. And I can count on, like, maybe, like a, I'm not, two fingers, I mean, two hands and 2 feet, the Hindu academics that might be potentially pro-Hindu, or like sympathetic to the Hindu cause in the academia. And it's a dire situation for us, and this is impacting future generations. Remember, you and I, all of us, are talking, but think about 20 years, 30 years later, right? What's going to be the narrative? If we don't take care of it today, the mango tree is going to be a rotten tree in 30 years, because that's what the ultimate objective really is, to make sure that the Sundar Pichais of the world do not stand up and say, I am a Hindu. That is the ultimate objective. Okay, because to call yourself Hindu is to call yourself Hindu nationalist in this particular narrative. The moment you open your mouth and say, I am Hindu, you have a 10-page disclosure that you have to potentially sign and say, you know what, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this. Which community has to go through this? None. So that's why narrative building is so critical along these lines.
And that's a very, very powerful thought you brought forward that I don't think many people even know about it. That the moment you declare yourself as a Hindu, you have to sign so many disclaimers and so many conditions of that. That's the dangerous part, that you are virtually shamed into being calling yourself a Hindu, as if we are an evil entity, regardless of the fact, despite the fact that we are the most peace-loving, not a law and order problem, no criminal elements in the society, barring exceptions here and there, but we are the ones who are targeted. Now, Utsavji, I will come to you with a very important point about fundraising and raising finance for this. I know one thing for sure, all of us know, it's not a secret. The amount of funding that goes into people like Ilhan and their campaign. You have George Soros declaring publicly $1 billion donation. What must happen for Hindus to come out and speak? And I would urge Sundar Pichai to come and say, hey, I'm a Hindu and I'm here because of my merit and performance, not because of anything else. But I was going back to the resolution that is on hand, condemning human rights violations and violations of international religious freedom in India, including those targeting Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, Adivasis, and other religious and cultural minorities. Now, here is a very important part. This resolution never talks about, and this woman never talks about, nor do those four Hindu congressmen supposedly there, never talk about the atrocities and brutalities and elimination of minorities, these very minorities, including Hindus, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many other countries. How come we are not forcing a resolution of this kind in the US Congress? What must happen? You mean to say we have no congressman that will do for us? A question. It's an inquiry.
Well, I will give you a very clear answer on that, and the answer is that we are finding it very hard to find our community members and lawmakers who would be willing to introduce a resolution on similar nature, highlighting the facts with statistics in the House. We don't have anybody. I will tell you one good example. Last year, we had wanted to bring a resolution about this. We found one Republican congressman who would be willing to sponsor it, but you need another congressman on the Democratic side to make it bipartisan so that it actually goes through with the right intentions and the right support. We could not find one Democratic Party congressman who would be willing to do it. And trust me, we approached a lot of people who are big donors to the Democratic Party, including those who hang out and take pictures with Raja Krishnamurti and who else. I can give out a list of 20 people.
Right.
None of them could get this done. And the biggest excuse they gave me was that let's do something positive. Let's focus on India-US relationship and do something positive. And I am like, that's the easiest thing to do. It's not very difficult than just celebrating Diwali and shaking hands with each other without doing actually anything about Diwali. So yeah, I actually have a problem. And this is something that we have to address. And this is something that Nikunj and Utsav and Hindu American Foundation, COHNA, HinduPACT, we are all trying to address. And that is the most important challenge we have to face. We have to come out of the shadows and deal with the problems that we have right now. And that is, and just to give you another example, Vibhuti Ji, you know, Ilhan Omar's trip to Pakistan occupied Kashmir was funded by two major Pakistani American leaders. And these people spend millions of dollars to fund different campaigns. We do not, the Nevada chapter of CAIR has a bigger budget than most Hindu American organizations nationally have. So you have to understand, and I'm just talking about big Hindu American organizations, not small ones like COHNA and HinduPACT. We are starved for resources. And I won't mince words here. So some of us are literally working on pennies to get this thing done. And we have to come, the entire community, and we claim to be one of the richest community in America. And I don't doubt that when I look at other people's houses and cars that they have. So please spend some resources on us. We will be providing the required input, the knowledge, the information, and the outreach that is needed. And Vibhuti Ji, we are ready to provide the narrative. We need the resources to be able to do that.
No, at HinduPACT you guys have done tremendous work. So, you are doing tremendous work. And, Vandana ji puts out lots of graphics on caste, varna, and things like that. It's very important to make that distinction, because even Hindus are confused about a lot of things. It's because education is missing. We were never taught in Indian schools when we studied in India about the virtues of our own texts. So there is an ignorance here. And that's what you said was very powerful. When you said the Indians would say, let's do something positive, as if what we are doing is negative.
Exactly.
As if negative is some kind of an evil. If bringing out the bleeding obvious is negative, how can that be negative? And I'm coming back to this particular subject with you on this, that, it's a very sad thing that not a single Democratic congressman could come forward, despite the fact that 80% of the Indians vote Democratic. I think you may be aware of that last Wednesday, apparently there was some Hindu American Council met in DC with Raja Krishnamurti, and they were trying to force India. They wanted to be the voice of reason in Ukraine regarding government of India's statement on Ukraine. At that was the same time Ilhan was pushing this resolution. What a sad thing.
I was invited to that event, Vibhuti Ji, and I refused to go there.
Right.
And I had long conversations with the two organizers of that event over the last 2 months. And they rejected me publicly because I was quite opposed to the perspectives they were pushing. In private conversations, they continued to show that our community not only has no understanding of the ground realities of geopolitics, but furthermore, even when they have a little bit of understanding, it is usually 3 months old. So that was the part that bothered me the most, not the part that they don't understand sometimes. The part that even when they understand, they're about 3 months behind. And I won't say anything further out here in public to defame anybody out there, but that was the most tragic expression of American Hindu and Indian American misjudgment of events geopolitically.
You are very polite in saying misjudgment of events. Sometimes I wonder if it is misjudgment or it's plain old stupidity. Sometimes wise people think that they know everything until they know, oops, I didn't know that. Nikunj, going forward, it's very important, is that somewhere along the line, those who are able to claim victimhood are always successful in creating a feeling against people like you and I, because we are not engaged. Here is an example. We are all immigrants. We think about India, our motherland, our original home, and then America, right? Because we live here. Those Indians who are born here, it's a different thing, but there is a connection out there. We don't talk about fixing Somalia or Mongolia or China or Pakistan. We are concerned about our own country. How would it, if I were to tell Ilhan, hey, fix Somalia, you know, take the virtues of democracy and the good life of America, translate it into Somalia, we will immediately be branded with all kinds of negative connotations. What do we do to fix that? Can we challenge Ilhan on that? Hey, young lady, kudos to you for what you are doing here. Fix Somalia. It needs fixing.
Well, look, there are a couple of things here, right? Well, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people who are immigrants here, they are focused on this India aspect of things.
Yeah.
I think that's not necessarily the right focus. I think the focus is here because the
Right.
power center is here, and
That's
we
right.
have to make sure that we say we are Americans that are concerned about the place we come from originally, or our ancestors come from, because there's a strong bond between this country and that country. Second thing is we exist here. We are American citizens. We have the equal right to have the right narrative for our own culture and heritage. So it's
Yeah.
very simple for me. We need to go and be the squeaky wheel. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And in this country, I mean, think about it this way. I'll give you an example of parenting. If you have two kids, okay, and one child is always quiet, just plays nice, but a lot of issues go on in that kid's head, okay, and then the second child is always, going to the parent and saying, I want this, or something's going on, how can I do this, how can I do this, can you please help me, can you do this? Who's going to get the attention? The kid who goes to the parent, not the kid who's just sitting on the sideline and saying, oh, everything's good, yes, thank you. No. So we have to understand that part, that we don't go to our lawmakers, we don't go to our people, and we don't play or talk about the victimization of our community. Even right now, forget about what has happened in the history, but right now our community is being victimized and being showcased as some monster community who is extremely privileged and has a golden spoon in their mouth, in their, sort of like a silver spoon in their mouth. All this stuff has been going on. So that needs to change, and change needs to happen at home. When I say home, it's your local government, local community, and talk about I'll give you an example of my own. Until even someone like me, until this whole caste issue happened, right, just a few years ago, I wasn't talking about my upbringing. And which is, because we are used to saying, hey, you know what, do the seva, don't talk about all the stuff, think about positives. But I had to bring out how I was raised, how when I came to America, I had to clean toilets, I had to cut meat, I have to do all these things. And my father was like assaulted on the streets of New York. He ended up in a hospital somewhere out in Pennsylvania. Why? Because he was just doing his business and his job on the streets of New York, right? So we come from these types of stories, and we don't talk about these stories. We don't talk about the dot busters. We don't talk about all these things that have happened to our community. When people know these things, they will realize that, oh my God, that the Hindus are so quiet, but they have gone through trauma. They have gone through emotional and physical trauma, and they continue to do so because of this anti-India and anti-Hindu narrative that continues to attack their way of living. So we need to have that victimhood understanding that we are victims. We're not faking it. We are victims, not just historically, but even today, right? So there's this image. See, policies are based on image. If you have the right narrative, then the policies will be shaped around that. If you're going to continuously see this idea that Hindus oppress others, then there will be policies that will be made against the Hindus. And when I say Hindus, it also extends to India, because a majority of India is Hindu, right?
Right.
And so both of them are connected to the hip. So it's very important for us to understand that part.
I totally agree with you that narrative, the storytelling has to be there. But there is a last thought that I have in mind, which I have been reading in the newspapers, and you would have read them too. Is that somewhere along the line, with the vested interests, including Hindus, forget about Indian American Muslim Council and others, who have taken this central position in driving the narrative of USCIRF. My point is, there is a new bogey that has been raised, and that bogey is narrative being built that there is an impending genocide of minorities going to happen in India before 2024. This is very dangerous. If this doesn't awaken us, we will face sanctions of the kind that we will never encounter before. This is very important. Utsavji, your last word on this. and whatever you want.
I think what is being built is part of a larger geostrategic plan. And I just want to quote a conversation I had with a very important and influential thought leader in American think tanks. His name is Derek Grossman. And it was a Twitter conversation. He's a national security analyst from Rand Corporation in DC, a very influential think tank. So he wrote about this Ilhan Omar issue. And I'm saying this now because this is indicative of a larger issue. Uh, he wrote about how the Ilhan Omar resolution is going to impact U.S.-India strategic partnership, and he was asking a question whether it is going to be too impactful, whether it is going to damage relations. So I responded to him by saying that the U.S.-India strategic partnership, whatever that means at this point, may be able to weather it through diplomatic channels and whatever it means. But we have to be concerned about the way in which Jamaat-e-Islami and Muslim Brotherhood influence is growing within American society. And this channeling these people and these resources and these pernicious influences to countries like Israel and India and Armenia is not going to cut it out for America anymore. So in America, I think we have to really push forward the point that all these resolutions, India will be fine. You may be able to damage India's reputation, India's resource generation, may be able to create violence in India also to some degree. But India has weathered much more in the last 100 years. We have to worry about America and American Hindus. American Hindus are going to be vilified, turned into almost hateful Nazis, which is happening right now. People are being called Nazis on the face for no reason. So that we have to stop here. And the larger American society, imagine what letting Ilhan Omars of the world get away with what they are getting away right now and multiplying it to a scale of 200, 300. Imagine what that would do to the American society. So I think, as much as we are being targeted and as much as we are on the crosshairs as Indian Americans and people in India are in the crosshairs, as Hindu Americans, we need to tell other Americans that our country is in danger. Everybody is in danger from this kind of foreign influence operation. Just look at what Ilhan Omar is doing and who are the people behind her. I mean, they caught one Imad Zubairi, a Pakistani national who was just arrested and given a prison sentence. Look at who Imad Zubairi was funding. And look at who Imad Zubairi was funding for the sake of Ilhan Omar. So this is my appeal to the American politician, that look at America, and this is going to burn us as much here as it is going to burn any other country. So India facing genocide in 2024, fine, that narrative you can keep playing until 2024. After that, you'll have to come up with a new narrative. But worry about what's happening in America, and we have to worry about what happens to the American Hindus.
That's very well put. Thank you both for joining today. Fascinating conversation. I hope viewers, will remember Swami Vivekananda's call to arise, awaken, and assert, to which Vibhuti Jha's fourth A is also added. I say act. Knowing what we know, all the wisdom and knowledge, if you do not act on it, then there is no bigger fool than us. And that's the point which I'm going to drive at. Thank you very much for joining. Like, subscribe, press the bell icon of the Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. Thank you both, the gentlemen. I always end with the thought, Satyamev Jayate.
Namaskar.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.